All right, Summit Community Church, good morning. Hope you guys are doing well. Great to see you guys here today. This has been like the most beautiful morning that we've had in days, probably. And you guys are here at church. Well done. You guys are the spiritual folks. Awesome. Well, great to have you guys here today. We are in a series called Faith in Exile. And before you guys leave today, I just want to encourage you to pick up a book that we have. This is a free resource for you. So these are free. This is about a 60-page book called A Creative Minority, about how to influence culture from the inside out through redemptive participation. So a lot that we've been covering in this series kind of comes straight through this book. And a creative minority, it's basically if you're here and you are a follower of Jesus, you've committed your life over to following him and you're passionate about that, kind of the felt response that you feel is that you are now a minority in a culture that is becoming less and less Christian. So how do we navigate through this? So we've been in the series called Faith in Exile. Week 1, Pastor Nate talked about faith under pressure. Last week, a good buddy of mine was here, Caleb Cole, that he talked about real faith in a fake world. And today, I'm going to share with you about faith in the fire, or as the kids say, faith that's lit. And I said that last night. And then a girl caught me after service, and she's like, nobody says that. She says the only people that say that are old people trying to be cool. And I said, thanks. So I will remember that for tomorrow. And I said it anyways. So here I am, an old person, just trying to be cool, I guess. So this is going to be a good day. Well, hey, imagine with me tomorrow, maybe you're at work, you're talking to somebody in your neighborhood, maybe you're getting a cup of coffee with someone, and they start talking about the epic Sunday that they had. Like, man, the weather was perfect. Went on a hike with some friends. Man, played some golf. Actually went up to Sedona to experience, man, just the amazing things that were taking place there. Man, my Sunday was so good. It was just awesome. And then they look to you and they say, how about you? What did you do on Sunday? And kind of there's this just tension kind of in the back of your heart. Because if you say, well, I also went on a hike, or I went to a soccer game with my kids, or I actually just sat around and watched Netflix all day. Well, that's normal. But if you say, well, it was Sunday morning, so I went to church. And then they might ask you, oh, well, why did you do that? And you say, well, because that's what I do every Sunday morning. And I go and I gather with other followers of Jesus, and we declare that Jesus is Lord. Like, if you do that, the response could be like, oh, you're one of those people. Okay. You're thought of as a little weird, thought of as a little odd, like there's something different about you. Like, or they almost start feeling sorry for you. Where it's like, oh, that's cute. Good for you. That's great. Good for you. Now, over the last 20 to 30 years, there's been a huge shift in American culture. While the way of Jesus is exploding around the world, the reality is that in places like America, Europe, and Australia, the way of Jesus is on a steady decline. And while church attendance in America isn't on a super rapid decline, the role of the church, or the perception of the church and people in the church, is growing more and more negative. See, over the last 20 to 30 years, there's really been two main critiques of the church of how we now operate under this kind of new reality that we are becoming more and more the minority in a culture that used to be not necessarily a Christian nation, but more and more people chose to follow Jesus. So there's kind of two responses and two critiques that people have of the church. The first response, if you're taking notes, is this. Number one, it's separatism. And Caleb talked a little bit about this last week, so I won't share a whole lot about this. But he shared that there's a scripture in the Bible that we are supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And being separatist, or separatism, is you're not really in the world, and you're not really of the world. It's this idea that, man, the world is just turning into hell and a handbasket. There is no hope, so let's just hunker down and let's just hide. Let's just be like a turtle where we just stay in our shell and we never come out until it's just super safe and that's it. Or you just go to work, you come home, you watch VeggieTales all day, and then on the weekends, you go to church, and that's it. Or the only time you do come out, it's kind of like with this judgmental, self-righteous smugness about you. This is kind of like the anti-everything crowd. Like I remember circles growing up as a church that we just boycotted everything. Everything was bad. Everything was evil. And while that was more like 20 to 30 years ago, the reality, we see some of that now. Like I remember just maybe 7 years ago, Starbucks on Christmas came out with just a plain red cup. Oh man, that put Christians in an uproar. So we had to boycott Starbucks. All of a sudden, no more Starbucks because of that. I never really got that, but that's what people did. But another dangerous way though, and something much more prevalent today, or at least just in the last 5 to 10 years, is something called syncretism. This is where you're kind of in churchy language, you're not really in the world, you're in the world and you're of the world. Just blend in, go with the flow, disappear into society and out of the church. And this is really Europe at large now, that these big, grand churches that were once filled with followers of Jesus who were countercultural and subversive are now just museums on sightseeing tours. It is a compromise that instead of allowing the church to influence the worldview of culture, we allow culture to influence the worldview of the church. It's when you kind of just follow or agree with scriptures that agree with culture. Things like, hey, be nice to people, okay? Love people. Like, that's what we need to do. Like, this is how we need to act. Like, just be kind, be nice. Things about justice, like about how we serve orphans and widows, and all that's great, and we're totally all for that. But you know who else is? Just about everybody else. So we take those scriptures and we're like, oh, because culture agrees with that, that's what we'll be about as well. But other scriptures like, lay down your life and follow Jesus. Or scriptures like, the greatest among you is actually the one who serves. Or scriptures like, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Or Jesus' teachings like about Sabbath and rest, or his teachings about generosity, or Jesus' teachings about marriage and sexuality. Well, those don't really jive very, very well with culture, so we'll just kind of avoid those. And syncretism sets in when we just avoid certain scriptures because the culture doesn't agree with them. And because of this, if you're a devout follower of Jesus, who holds to the teachings of Jesus and the way of Jesus, if you have moral convictions and you stand with Jesus on morality, you now actually have a low moral ground and you have little influence. See, there was a time when Christians were actually at the center of cultural influence. Government leaders, PhD professors, universities, writers, authors, philosophers, the majority of those people were actually Christians, were followers of Jesus. Pastors at one point were held in high standing, and we still see this like in pockets of America today as well, for sure. But nowadays, it's like, man, if somebody asked me what I do for a living, oh, great. And not that I'm embarrassed, not that I'm ashamed, but if I say, well, I'm a pastor and I work at a church, to some people, it's like I'm a sitcom joke. I'm a moron. I am a bigot. And not only if you're a pastor, but if you are here and you are a devout follower of Jesus, you kind of like feel this as well. And here's the thing, like I'm not perfect by any means. Like I make a ton of mistakes. I fail constantly. I am so thankful for God's grace, and I got a lot of work to do. But let me put this super bluntly. Because I choose not to get drunk, because I choose not to participate in immoral activities, because I choose not to engage in conversations that are filled with sexual innuendos and vulgarity, I am now considered to be out of touch, a little bit odd, a little bit different, and absolutely no fun. That's kind of the consideration for somebody like me now. So what do? Do we just give up? Do we throw in the towel? I mean, what is the point exactly? First off, if you're here today and you call yourself a follower of Jesus, you are not a victim. Absolutely not. Okay? And I'm not one of these like cultural wars people, like we gotta stand up and we gotta fight for what's right. Like that's actually very harmful and very hurtful, and there's not a whole lot of good that ever comes of that. But what are we supposed to do? Last week, if you were here, Caleb talked about the importance of being connected to culture, touching culture, while also being counter-cultural. So what does that look like? Well, Daniel's kind of been our guide to help navigate through this new cultural reality. So a quick backstory here. Daniel and his friends are living in the nation that God has blessed, where their whole idea is like, man, we want to live our lives for God, under the authority of God. We want to live our lives as God's way. And they are taken away from that place, taken to a new place where they are now foreigners and exiles in a new land that's completely void of God and against the ways of God. So now this is where they live. And we see this terminology all throughout Scripture, that you are now a foreigner or an exile in a new land. That if you are here and you are a follower of Jesus, your felt experience is really that of exile, or that you should feel like a foreigner in a foreign land. It's very similar to that of Daniel and his friends a few thousand years ago. That if you are a passionate, devout follower of Jesus, you should feel a little bit out of place where you live. You shouldn't really feel like you belong. Still here, still actively involved, absolutely still touching culture, contributing to society, but not of it. So, how do we live with this as our new normal and our new cultural moment of life in the fire? Well, I'm glad you asked, because this is your lucky day. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. If you got a Bible, you can grab it. We're also going to put them up here on the screen. You guys okay? That was like a heavy introduction right there, okay? I apologize. All right, but we're gonna have fun. It's gonna get better, I promise, okay? There is encouragement, in theory, coming. Here we go. King Nebuchadnezzar, he made an image of gold 60 cubits high, this is 90 feet, 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, okay, you'll notice very quickly that the author of this loves lists. Okay, there are a ton of lists. We'll just say and have to get through it. So all the people, the officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, there's that good old zither again, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All right, so King Nebuchadnezzar, who's the most powerful man in the world and the head of a global superpower, makes the statue. We don't know what the statue is exactly, but the most agreed upon theory is that it is a statue representing Babylon and everything that Babylon stands for. So what they are worshiping is a culture that Babylon stands for, an agreed upon way of life that is void and empty of God, that thousands of people are bowing down, coming together in Babylon. We worship the culture and the way of life that has now been set before us. All the people are there doing this. At least, almost all. We go further, verse 8. By this time, astrologers came forward and they denounced the Jews. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither. I think we need to get a zither up here on stage, the worship team. From now on, the band, they're going to have a zither up here. It's going to be great. Lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Or if you read this story to your kids as you're trying to get them to sleep, it's Shadrach, Meshach, and to bed we go. Sorry. There are more cheesy jokes coming, okay? So hold on. You better wake up. There are more. Who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. All right, I just love this. Just picture the scene going on here. This is like a scene right out of Hunger Games. Have you guys seen Hunger Games? Anybody? No? Are we boycotting that too? Okay, anyways. Right out of Hunger Games. Thousands of people all over Babylon, they are here. But 3 Jewish people, though, refuse to bow down. And they're quiet about it. They don't yell, they don't scream, they're not like protesting, they're not making a riot, they don't have signs, there's not a bullhorn, there's nothing like that, but just quietly, peacefully, they're just like, no, we're not gonna bow down. And then there's these astrologers that see them and then bring the attention to the king to try to get these people that are rising in influence and power, trying to get them into trouble. Now, the reason that Daniel's not there, if you remember last week, Daniel is now in the capital, kind of taking care of the affairs of the king. So that's why he's not there. So going further to verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up for you? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you don't worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Notice the hostility and the boasting of the political leader at the time. Nothing like America today. I'm so glad we've evolved way past this, man. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar," I love this part, "we don't need to defend ourselves." I love that. We don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Basically, our God is more powerful than your God, so bring it on. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold or the way of life that you have set up. I love it. Don't yell, don't scream. They simply stand up for what they believe in, or more importantly, stand up for who they believe in and who they believe will be able to rescue them. They simply say, no, we are not bowing down to this nonsense. We are not going to do it. And keep in mind, this is a time period where religion, spirituality, and politics all go together. So for these 3 guys not to bow down, it's not only countercultural, it's not only subversive, but this is actually a threat to the status quo. So going further in verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar, man, this dude, he is furious with rage now. With Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Whew, this is super hot. And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. How dare they? So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar, leaped to his feet in amazement. And he asked his advisors, whoa, weren't there 3 men that we tied up in there and threw into the fire? They replied, well, duh, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I actually see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. So who's the 4th person there in the fire? Who is it? Jesus. Yeah, because anytime someone asks you a question in church, the answer is always Jesus, okay? Even if it's not, just say Jesus, and like in a roundabout way, it might be right, okay? Yeah. The theory is that it's Jesus there. And we don't really know for sure, it could be, but what is important to know is that God is with them in the fire. That is what we know for sure. Go further to verse 26. Nebuchadnezzar, he then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and he shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies. There was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes weren't scorched. There was no smell of fire on them, not even that post-campfire smell. Nothing is even on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he begins praising the creator God of the universe because these guys said, no, we're not going to do it. And God saw them through it, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. So then King Nebuchadnezzar respects them for disobeying his commands. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. Okay, not the best way to respond. He's new to this whole God thing, different day and age, super barbaric time. But anyways, but no other gods can save in this way. So the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Wow, what a story. So what in the world is this story all about? What is going on here? How does this help us navigate through our reality of exile as followers of Jesus? What does that mean? Now, how many of you may have grown up in church and you remember back in the day the felt board or that like flannel board in Sunday school? You guys remember that? Oh yeah. I mean, those stories came to life through the felt board. The iPad has nothing on the felt board. This is the story that put the felt board on the map. I mean, you had the little blazing fire, you had Jesus, you had the 3 clean-cut guys, you had the mean king, but man, this was the story. But what is this story truly about exactly? What is this talking about? Well, here's what it's about. Write this down. It's about choosing what way of life you'll bow down to. Because the reality is we're all created in the image of God. We are all created to worship. All of us will bow down to a certain way of life, but it's about choosing which way of life you're going to bow down to. So the question is simply this. It's not will you bow down, but the question is which way of life will you bow down to? See, Babylon at the time was the largest and most influential city in the world. So it was an actual city, but it was also a symbolic culture. And the symbolic culture that they had is that their whole mantra, their whole desire was to be a place and to be a culture completely empty from God, in open rebellion against God and God's ways. In fact, there's 3 chapters in Revelation dedicated to a Babylon-like place, and many scholars actually suggest those chapters are pointing to what is now the United States of America. So Babylon is a real place, absolutely. But it's actually a symbolic culture. See, God's people, the nation of Israel in the story, are dragged away from a nation rooted in God and his way to Babylon, a place being committed to being completely void of God. And it doesn't take a lot of convincing to know that we now live in a culture that's operating more and more under autonomy from God, where people's allegiance isn't really in God and God's way of life and what he desires, but in a way of life where God has very little to no authority over our lives. And I'm certainly not suggesting that where we live is this terrible place. Like, absolutely not. Like, I love where we live. This is awesome. I thank God that I get to live and grow up in the United States of America. Man, I'm so stinking blessed and I'm so lucky and I'm so thankful for that. But it's not the kingdom of God. And it's not heaven on earth. Absolutely not. And my concern, though, is that our culture and its way of life has been elevated to a type of God. But when our allegiance is in Jesus, here's the thing. We will refuse to bow down to a new set of agreed upon behaviors and way of life just because the majority of people say that it's right and say that it's okay. We will refuse to. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to worship what everybody else is worshiping. Refused to bow down to a way of life that everybody else is bowing down to. And odds are there's something about today's way of life which makes it really easy for you to elevate it over your allegiance to Jesus. I know it certainly is for me. Are you kidding me? Like money, greed, materialism, entitlement, safety, security, justice, autonomy, individualism, all of those things. Like, it is really easy to misplace your loyalty away from the way of Jesus and into the American way of life. And there is a ton that we can learn from the story. But what's the response? What do we do? In a culture like ours, in a culture that's strikingly similar to Babylon, what do? I think the response is actually simple. It's simple as just not bowing down. Not necessarily in like a literal, physical way, but in a metaphorical sense. And it all starts with just simple, ordinary acts of not bowing down to what everybody else is doing. I love this picture we're going to put up here on the screen. This is 1930s, a Nazi rally taking place, thousands of people, a sea of people in the crowd, all doing the Hail Hitler sign. There's one person, you could hardly see him, but if we focus in here, you could see this one person not going to do it, not bowing down to this nonsense. I don't agree with this. I am not going to bow down just because everybody else is doing it. I am standing up for what I believe in. See, that gentleman's name is August Landmasser. And the story is he was dating a Jewish girl at the time. It's always a girl, right? It's always a girl. So he's dating a Jewish girl at the time. And because of this, he is then thrown into jail, drafted against his will, and then murdered and killed. His girlfriend is then thrown into a Jewish concentration camp where she is killed as well. One guy standing up. You do whatever it is you need to do to me, but nope, I'm not going to do it. I am not bowing down to this nonsense. Now, the story of August Landmasser is pretty dramatic. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's a pretty dramatic story. But most of the time, I would argue, not bowing down is far less dramatic. And here's what I mean by that. Maybe you're talking with some friends. Maybe you're at lunch or something, maybe at work. And all of a sudden, they start gossiping about someone you know. Maybe someone in your friend group. Start slandering this person. Maybe it's someone in the PTA. Ooh, now it's getting juicy. You go, oh, tell me more. Or maybe it's someone in your church. Slandering, talking bad about this person. Then they look to you. Well, what do you think? And you just say, you know what? I'm not going to go there. Let's talk about something else. Because as a follower of Jesus, you know that there's the power of life and death in the tongue. You know that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. You know that everyone is created in the image of God, and to talk negatively about one of God's creation is like talking negatively about God. That's one example. Or let's say there's a big concert coming into town, like bigger than Taylor Swift, all right? And you are so excited for this concert because it is the Backstreet Boys, okay? Probably not the best example, okay? But anyways, maybe the Backstreet Boys are coming into town and you can't wait, you're just so excited. You get online, you get on StubHub and you see, oh man, but the prices are so stinking expensive. Oh my gosh, how am I going to afford this? And people around you are like, but you deserve it. And you haven't had a plan to save or anything like that. It's gonna cause you to go in debt just to see the Backstreet Boys, but you have to do this, but now you gotta make some financial mistakes. And because you have a commitment to generosity, you say, you know what, I'm just gonna say no. I'm not going to go. Way too expensive for me. I don't want to go in debt. I have a commitment to generosity. I'm just not going to bow down to that, what everybody else is doing. Or maybe you're at work and you have this opportunity to set your family up for financial success that you've only dreamed of. I mean, you have this opportunity to be promoted and to make a ton of money, and it is amazing. The only thing is, man, you'll have to just lie a little bit. You'll have to manipulate the system just a little bit. You'll have to cheat your way there just a little bit. But because you're a follower of Jesus, you say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I trust God. I trust that he's going to provide for me, and I don't need to cheat my way. I don't need to lie my way. I don't need to manipulate my way to success because I believe God's way for thriving and flourishing, so I'm just not going to go there. Or maybe it's this. Maybe you're dating someone. You're falling in love. And you're talking to somebody about this, and you're so excited. And they're like, wow, it sounds like you're on a trajectory to maybe get engaged and to be married, and you're just glowing and you're excited. And then they say, so are you living together? I mean, it's so expensive to live here now. All the Californians moving here. Thank you, Californians, by the way. Just everything is getting so expensive. Are you living together? And you say, well, no, we're not. They say, what? Why? You say, well, we're not even really sleeping together. What? How is that? Well, because we trust God and we believe that God created male and female with dignity and respect and self-worth, and that God created marriage and set it up in a way for people to thrive and flourish. So we're going to trust his ways to do that. So we're actually waiting until we get married to even have sex. Wow, really? Okay. It's just quiet rebellion against the status quo, where every day we are faced with decisions where we have to choose between allegiance to God and his kingdom or to what our culture says is the best way that we're supposed to live. And when we place our lives under the authority of God and his kingdom, we declare that God's ways and the teachings of Jesus are the best way to thrive and to flourish in this world. And I harp on this a lot, but here's the thing. Jesus is not a principle. He's not a religion. He's not a system. He's not a theology. But he is the pathway to the absolutely best life and the best way to live. And if God is our king, you will not bow down to any other kingdom that is not God's. Not to get God to love you, not to get God to be pleased with you, not for God to cherish you more, none of that. But because God loves you, cherishes you, pleased with you, because he knows what's best for you, he calls you to fall under his authority and to live and thrive and flourish according to his way and the teachings of Jesus. That's why it's there, because he loves the living daylights out of you. So what that means is we bow down to his kingdom, and that means we refuse to bow down to anything else. But here's what we need to know about that. Here's what we need to know about not bowing down. Number one is this: it will upset people. See, not giving in to what everybody else is doing just carries with it a critique and a vision for a better way of life. Like, to say no to what everybody else is doing or what everybody else thinks is right is by default saying because you think it's wrong. It's why even though you're not being judgmental, even though you're not attacking people, even though you're not even criticizing them, even though none of that really even happens, people will get defensive and people will get offended simply by you not participating. It's like, how many vegans do we know? Like, I've been around vegans before, and I'm like, hey, do you want a burger? No, thanks. You want a hot dog? No, that's okay. And then when you ask them why, it's like, well, because I'm a vegan and I don't eat meat. What is the reaction of most people there? What? What is wrong with you? How can you not possibly eat that? Like, and they're not criticizing you for doing it. It's just like, this is a personal stance that I have, and that's it. But other people get offended just by somebody else saying no. Here's another personal example of this. About 7 to 10 years ago, this famous TV show came out. I think it was on HBO. Everybody was watching it, talking about it. I just did a little bit of research on it, and I found, man, there's a lot of like intense sex and nudity scenes in the show, so I'm just going to choose not to watch it, not to participate in that. And then people would talk about it more and like, Ryan, have you seen the show? Just be like, no. They're like, what? When are you going to start watching it? Just be like, I'm not going to watch that. And without me even saying why, the response would be, oh, is it because all the nude and sex scenes in it? I'd be like, well, yeah, that's why. And then they would be upset with me for not watching it. Like, how dare you not watch the show? Okay, sorry. Or it's like my friend Matt, who travels a lot for business in his company, and he travels a lot, and some other guys join him. These guys are married, these guys have kids, and they're there, and they're on business together, and then they do their business stuff, they eat dinner together, and then a few guys are like, hey, Matt, we're going to the strip club. You want to join us? No, I'm not going to do that. What? Why? You know what? I just don't want to participate in that kind of stuff. I'm married, like, my life is about that. And then people get upset at him. He's the odd one. He's the weird one for choosing to not bow down to what everybody else is doing, and people get upset with him. He's not being judgmental. He's not criticizing them. He's not saying, how dare you do that? He's just saying no. But they respond to him, how dare you not go? What is wrong with you? So number one, it will upset people. Number two is this. It may cost you something. It could cost you a sale. Might cost you some teasing, some popularity, might cause you some friendships and relationships. For some of our brothers and sisters around the world, though, it actually does cost them their lives. In fact, the most agreed upon stat is that there are 170 followers of Jesus every single day who die because they stand up for what's right and they say, I am not bowing down to that nonsense. And they actually lose their lives. Like, we don't face that here, thank God. But there's a verse in the Bible where Paul says, if you choose to live a godly life in Christ Jesus, you will be persecuted. Wow, let's put that on coffee mugs. I mean, let's put that on a bumper sticker. That sounds encouraging, you know? Let's put that on those Christian calendars that you get up and you read in the morning. Oh, what does God have for me today? If you desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus, you will be persecuted. Great, can't wait to live my life today. Thank you for that one. But here's the thing, that is a promise. If you live the way of Jesus, fully devoted to him, you'll feel some of that tension. And you may feel at times as if you've been thrown into a furnace and that your faith is in the fire because your faith is on fire. And while it may cost you something, and while people might make fun of you, while people might not like it, the cost is worth it because of number 3. You are not alone. See, there were 3 people thrown into the fire. It wasn't just Shadrach, it wasn't just Meshach, and it wasn't just Abednego, but a community of 3 dudes who refused to bow down to the status quo and refuse and say that my allegiance is fully in God and his ways, and that's it. 3 people. Here's the reality. You may feel alone at times. You may feel like you're the only one. You're the only one that doesn't participate, the only one that doesn't engage, the only one that doesn't, man, it just gets so frustrating. Am I the only one? I would argue there's a lot of people in Surprise, a lot of people in Goodyear, a lot of people in Litchfield Park, a lot of people in Buckeye who are refusing to bow down to the status quo. You are not alone. There are others who are willing to get into the fire. A community of people all around us. In fact, there's a room full of people here in Buckeye, Arizona that say, my allegiance is in Jesus and his way, and I will only bow down to that. But notice here the impact that 3 guys make to the most powerful person and the largest empire on the planet at the time in Daniel chapter 4. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. That statement goes out to the entire empire of Babylon, all because 3 people had the courage to not bow down. If that's the kind of impact made by just 3 people, what kind of impact could be made by a room full of people in Buckeye, Arizona? I think it could be pretty awesome. Not only that though, because we know that there was another in the fire. You guys said it, Jesus, right? It's gotta be Jesus. There was another in the fire. God was with them. I think sometimes we miss the 2 most important verses right here. Verse 17 and 18, I'll read it to you again. They say, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. He will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he doesn't, this is so like in your face. We want you to know, your majesty, we'll not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. I love this. You see, their decision to not bow down wasn't contingent on what God would do for them. It was simply based on them knowing that God would be with them. It's not, okay, God, here's the deal. I'll make a deal with you. We won't bow down, okay, as long as we're not thrown into the fire. Okay, sound good? Great. Or if we are thrown into the fire, just make nothing bad happen to us, that would be great. No, they don't do that. Throw us into the freaking fire. We know that God is going to be with us no matter what. They know that if God is for them, no one can be against them. They know some things may come against them, but bring it on, because God is with us. They know that greater is he that is in them than anything that's in this world. I am not going to bow down. Yeah, I'll receive criticism and teasing, and I'll miss out on something, but life with Jesus and with God is so much better than any of that. So I'm just not going to do it. See, the gospel is not, you give your life, yeah, you can clap. But the gospel is not, you give your life over to Jesus and then life is easy. That is boring, and that takes no faith whatsoever. But the gospel is you give your life over to Jesus, and he is enough no matter what. You know why young people leave church? It has nothing to do with the music. It has nothing to do with the fog machines being foggier, or the lights tuning up to the music better, or having better coffee or a cafe. It has nothing to do with that. Why they leave the church is they're like, the people in the church are no different than me. Why would I be a part of that? Like, these young people want to be thrown into the fire. They are being thrown into the fire. Young people today, it is so difficult and challenging for them to live the way of Jesus. They want to, and they want to see it modeled in front of them. You know why young people come back to the church? Because they want to see a move of God like no one's ever seen before. Throw us into the fire, because we know there's another there. Like, all throughout history in America, when it seems like faith is on like things are happening, things are getting a little tough, young people are the ones who bring in revival. It is young people across America that say, we want to experience the presence of God like never before. It's why right now there are pockets of revivals happening all around America. You know who ushers those in? 18 to 22-year-olds. A lot of times on college campuses, that they say, we're not going to bow down. We want to bow down to nothing but God and his kingdom and his way, because we know that even if we're in the fire, I'd much rather be there than bow down to anything else. What an opportunity we have to show the way and to lead the way of what it looks like to be on fire for Jesus, even if we're in the fire. Can you guys stand with me today? Hey, we're just going to pray together. And when I say pray, you guys go ahead and pray right where we're at. And then we're just going to sing a song. We're going to worship together. This is a song that I had on replay and on repeat while I was just reading through Daniel chapter 3 and preparing for this message here. Some of you right now, you feel like you're going in through a fire. You're in some sort of fire where you feel like it's just intense and it's hard and you don't know what to do. Just know this, you are not alone. There's another in the fire. God is with you. There's other people. There's a community of people that want to rally with you and come alongside you as well. So God, we thank you for today.